you running as a president?
When I have formulated an answer to that question for myself, you will be the first to know. You can ask the question again. There still is no answer. The decision has simply not been made.
Okay, if I can answer the question, we had a nice fellow who spoke very highly of you. His name was Mayor Rodrigo Duterte. Last month.
Yes.
And I must say, he spoke very well of Senator. There's rumors of the two of you possibly joining in some way. Is this true, or is this rumors? What's your response?
Well, let me just say that in the past few, I guess, the past year, myself as an individual and the party to which I belong, the Nacionalista Party, have been in constant communication with all of the players in the political field. And this is, of course, in anticipation and in preparation as to what role we are going to play in the upcoming elections of 2016. And that is something that continues to go on. But unfortunately, the clarity which we seek so as to make these important decisions has not yet come. We are in the midst of a very unusual political cycle. Generally speaking, by August, by even July of the year previous to the election, it is quite clear what all our candidates are doing. We know what the parties are going to do. We know who their standard bearers will be, who know which team belongs to which party, and all of this. Right now, as we speak, there are only one main declaration as a candidate for presidency. We do not have any presidential and vice presidential teams still formed. The parties have not made clear what it is that they are going to do. And it is very important for us to watch what parties will do, because in a national election, it is impossible to run a successful campaign without strong national political machinery. You cannot be in every one of the 7,107 islands of the Philippines. You must have people working for you, and that is the role that the party plays for its candidates. Running for a national position is an extremely important, profound decision to make that we must really seek clarity before we make such decisions. A year ago, it was very clear, Binay Rojas. In the past year, many things changed. Other names have come up, other team-ups have happened. The assumed position in terms of popularity have also changed. And again, the dynamic only began in the last few months, and belatedly again in the last few months. And that's why I think that right now, you could say that it is very late in the day for our political leadership, for our political candidates for the next election. The picture is still quite unclear. As to the specific question on Mayor Dicong Duterte, we have actually been friends for a very long time, and I, of course, I'm very grateful to be considered as anyone's running mate, because that is immediately an assessment of you as an asset to such an effort. I believe that the mayor will be a great asset to any team for whatever position. He has shown his capabilities, and he has shown that he can get, as I mentioned earlier, the job done. But again, it's funny to be able to say this at the end of July, but to say that it's still early and it's still not yet clear to finalize those kinds of discussions.
Senator, I will not stress you with any political question. I will ask you a very simple question, which is a day-to-day problem of all of us. Let's just talk about EDSA. How would you solve that problem and to minimize the traffic in that particular area, considering that EDSA is the main thoroughway of Metro Manila?
I think there is no need to reinvent the wheel. We can look to our neighbors and see what their solutions were and what were successful. It must be founded on having a good, efficient, cheap mass transit system. A mass transit system that actually has the capacity to move people and goods in a way that is acceptable to people. We cannot, it's all very well having an MRT, but if any one of you has ridden the MRT in the last few months, you will all know that it is not an acceptable way to travel, simply because the inefficiency of the rail system. You never know if you are going to actually get to your destination or if you will stop in the middle of your trip. You do not even know when you are going to be able to buy tickets. You cannot buy tickets on a long-term basis because the machine doesn't work, it broke. These are problems that simply should no longer exist. It is saddening to note that when the LRT was first put online, we were the first country in Southeast Asia to have a mass transit system. And here we find ourselves, the only way that we can boast about our mass transit system is that we can say, unlike other countries in the Philippines, our trains fly. And that is the only good thing that you can say about it. And even then, it is rather a painful joke for those who have to suffer the indignity of waking up at 4 in the morning to get to their work at 9 and getting home at 1 in the morning, having to cook dinner, take their 2-hour rest and start again. And this is simply unacceptable. And again, we base it on the mass transit system. The solutions that we see in terms of actual personal conveyance, in terms of personal vehicles, we look at Singapore, we look at London, they simply make it so expensive for you to run a car that it discourages most, I would say 95% of people to have a car. But people have to get to work. People have to get home from work. Therefore, you cannot do that without a very, very efficient and widespread mass transit system.
I have two questions. Number one, you touched base on, and as being the chairman of the Public Works Committee in the Senate, I would like to ask, because I have noticed that most of the PPPs that have been implemented or finalized or awarded are what I personally call elitist PPPs, as they focus on skyways, road extensions, but not touching base on mass transit and railways. So what are your views, hypothetically, when you run as president and get elected?
I think the concept of PPPs is a valuable one, and I think we still don't get it in government in the Philippines of what a PPP should really be. We also have a very limited view on how to assess projects. The COA, the Commission on Audit, will simply look at the lowest price. Anything that you do that does not involve the lowest priced supplier immediately is viewed with suspicion. The difficulty with the proper implementation of PPPs, as I see it, is the ability for government to assess quality. A qualitative analysis rather than a simply quantitative analysis. I have made a bit of a study on this because we were writing the amendments to the PPP law. And the idea should really be, rather than dictating in very strict terms to a private sector partner what they should do and what the project should entail, I think that the view should come from the other end. The view should come from the required deliverables that you are asking of your private sector partner. How they go about it is up to them. It is in their interest to make a profit, and therefore it is also in their interest to make the project work, to be profitable, to be efficient, because only then will they make money. Now, we have seen examples, most notably in Australia, in Melbourne and in Victoria, where they simply make up a list of deliverables. Now, when we talk about a list of deliverables, the deliverables again should not be purely in terms of quantity, in terms of quantity, in terms of cost, but also in terms of quality. As an example that I saw, a children's hospital was built in Melbourne, and before they drew up the list of deliverables, they surveyed all the stakeholders, the children, the parents, the doctors, the nurses, the workers, the technicians, all of them, and said, what would you like in our hospital? And they put that together, the list of deliverables together, and they bidded on several firms bidded on the project, and they allowed for beyond the straight list, the list of deliverables as I mentioned. They allowed the private sector partner to do whatever else they wanted, so long as they provided those deliverables. And what did they do? They put in wellness centers, they put up a hotel around the hospital. If you see the hospital, number one, you will never see a patient at any point unless you are a patient yourself and are in that part of the hospital. Secondly, we were in that hospital for 3 hours. I did not hear one child crying. And the reason being that they had attended to it in a way where they had this very large aquarium, where they had these meerkats, where they had playgrounds. And that came from that survey that they took from the stakeholders and saying that we must do more to make what is essentially an unpleasant experience as pleasant as possible. To the point that former patients ask their parents, can we go back to the hospital so I can play with the fish, I can watch the meerkats, I can play in the playground with my friend who is still in the hospital. So that kind of PPP approach is highly sophisticated and highly evolved. And we have a long way to go until we get to that point. And I think, again, the very limited assessment system that we have for figuring out which projects will do the most good and will actually provide the services that we require, we have yet to understand all of that. And we are still, I think, in the process. And that is what we have tried to instill in the amendments that we have put into the PPP law.
You mentioned about telecommunication and the substandard quality of it. And this is in a direct result of the four limitations that is in place. Hypothetically again, when elected, is this priority agenda that you might want to look at about the four limitations that are in place so that competitive owners or investors would actually set up office or services here?
Telecommunications has made the world what it is now. Yes, it is what made the world global. We cannot say that an economic activity exists solely in one place. Suppliers come from everywhere. The marketing goes to everywhere. I think it was 5-6 years ago where the volume of commerce conducted on the internet passed the volume of commerce conducted face-to-face. That is something that we must immediately recognize. When I first came to be chairman of the Committee on Public Works and Infrastructure, there was no mention of development of the internet. And we must now start to change our mindset and think telecommunications, the internet, is part of the essential infrastructure of any country. We now have the most expensive internet in the world. The only country whose internet is slower than the Philippines is Afghanistan. And we are the second slowest. How are we supposed to conduct business on this basis? I think it is in terms of policy that we are lacking. But again, we need not reinvent the wheel. We can see the examples of many other countries, both in the region and outside, who have made a success of it and who continue to make a success of it. And again, the technologies exist, the skills that are required exist. It's just a question of us taking on the policy and the concept that this is important and it's an essential. It's not a luxury. It's not for fun. It is because this is the way that business is conducted in this day and age.
Mr. Senator, I personally believe that you will become President of the Philippines, of the Republic of the Philippines. One of these days. It's not 2016, maybe immediately after. If my perception is similar to yours, what do you intend to do about it? About becoming President of the Philippines?
To achieve any success, I believe in any political career, one must always hold central to your work and to all the efforts that you are doing is that essentially you are in public service. And because you are in public service, the most important measure of your success and of your recognition as a successful and effective public servant is performance. If you have any desire to remain in political life, in public life, then you must always go back. Of course, the partisan forces are there. Of course, there are individual elements that come into play. But I think at the heart of it, one must always say, at the end of the day, I will be judged by my constituency, by my performance, how well I did for them. It's easy to be distracted. It's easy to stray from that idea. But one must just keep reminding oneself that make sure you have done your best, your absolute best. And people will know that. And if we are to enjoy any success, it will flow from that, I believe.
Good afternoon, Senator Marcos. I'm Dr. Sharif Mandan III from the province of Maguindanao, and we work with Unity as well. Now, you mentioned, hypothetically of course, that there will be lasting peace in Mindanao, and thank you very much for that. But while all of us want peace, yearn for peace, some of us have focused on economic development. So more than a question really, it's an invitation for you to come to the province of Maguindanao, specifically to our plantations and see what's going on.
Thank you. That is exactly the same idea that I have, because as we are in the midst of these discussions on the Bangsamoro Basic Law, I will try to remind our policymakers that whatever we do with the Bangsamoro Basic Law, we must see it as only a part of the peace process. And I think that when we talk to our Muslim brothers and sisters, the complaint that they make, that they are underrepresented and underdeveloped, is quite valid. And we must address that. One essential part of addressing the problem is to bring development to the conflict areas. The theory is simple. If a person has a good job, makes a reasonable, a decent living, is able to feed his family, send his children to school, to clothe them, then there is no motivation for them to pick up a weapon and go to war. And I think that that is something that we should aspire to, in terms of not only giving a political autonomy and recognition of the differences in culture, in heritage, in history, in law, in religion, but also to provide the means by which this feeling of underrepresentation and underdevelopment is assuaged. That is something very important. It is something that can only be done over the long term, and it can only be done not through signing of agreements. That is part of it, but that is not the be-all and the end-all. You have to go back and actually be inclusive. Again, this question of being inclusive in whatever development, whatever progress you bring to the rest of the country. One of the most profound statements I heard during our hearings in the BBL was one of the leaders just simply said, "Stop treating me like a Muslim, treat me like a Filipino." And that is an extremely profound statement, and that's something that sometimes we lose sight of.
You mentioned something about the tax regime you impose on this. What industry will get the highest tax? What industry will have the lowest tax? And in this regard, may I also ask you to elaborate on that Marshall Plan you had, you did a study about, and how do you intend to have this implemented in your administration?
I mentioned the Marshall Plan because it's something that we examined and to see the effects. It was an intellectual exercise in my economics class. And the conclusions that we arrived at was that the trickle-down, the Marshall Plan was based on the idea of trickle-down. Just send a lot of money, invest in the big-ticket items, and the benefits of that will trickle down to the lowest parts of the economy. And upon examination, 10, 20 years after the Marshall Plan, it turns out that trickle-down theory does not work. It is not the role of business. It is not the role of the private sector to try and help that the distribution of wealth. The job of the private sector is to add value to all that you are doing in services, in goods, and to follow a socially responsible profit motive. That is an important function in the progress of our society, of our economy. It is up to the government to change that situation. We must make active policy decisions. We must take active implementation of that policy, where the distribution of wealth is done at a much better pace. We must always look to the disenfranchised. We always must look to those who are vulnerable. And that is the job of government. And that is something that we have not been, I do not think that we have addressed properly. We hear often about the 7% growth rate, and yet we spend 65 billion on the CCTs. The poverty rate does not change. The unemployment rate does not change. The literacy rate does not change. The mortality rate in our hospitals does not change. So basically, the way we are doing it is not working. It is often cited, the examples of Brazil and India in the CCTs as a tool for the distribution of wealth. In Brazil and in India, the CCTs were funded by corporate taxes. Hence, you can see there really is a distribution of wealth element in that. In the Philippines, CCTs are funded by borrowings. So that immediately wipes out the entire, one of the most important parts of the CCTs, which is a distribution of wealth. So we have to rethink some policies. Anyone who has made even a cursory examination of any economy and its reactions and its policies towards poverty will know that direct transfer payments, i.e. throwing money at the problem, simply doesn't work. Hence the very famous Chinese saying about fishes. Don't give me a fish, teach me how to fish. And this is what we must do. We must give people the opportunity to make it better. How do we do that? The very beginning of that entire process, improve our educational system. With a well-trained, well-experienced workforce, you can do anything. And that will provide opportunities for people. That, again, if there are more high school graduates, there are more college graduates, literacy rate is improved. And in this day and age, our command of the English language is important. Because for better or for worse, that is the language of the internet, that is language of commerce. All of those things we must provide as a service of government. And I have always believed in the principle that education is the most important service that government provides its people. And that is just the beginning point. Now, then you must again have faith in your own economy, and that you invest in it. You invest in your own economy. Because when you invest in roads, when you invest in transport systems, when you invest in power plants, you are not investing in an economy. You're investing in your people. Because you are making an investment to provide your people with an opportunity, with a framework in which they can flourish. Look at Filipinos abroad. When given the opportunity, they work, and knowing what the rules that are stable, you work hard, you do well, and with a bit of luck, you'll make it. And look at them. They make it. Filipinos make it. And we are not only successful, we are actually sought out because of the good work that we do. That all else being equal, they will choose a Filipino over another nationality. With such an asset, I cannot understand why we are in the doldrums when it comes to job creation, when it comes to the quality of life issues that we are facing. And can you imagine the 8 million Filipinos, all their skill and industry and resourcefulness that we are all famous for? Can you imagine bringing them all back to the Philippines? Can you imagine the contribution that they will make to nation building, to our progress? That is something that we really have to do, is to understand that government is here to provide a framework for the private sector to flourish. And there are many ways to do that. Some simple, some more complicated, but nevertheless, that should be the job as we see it in terms of the partnership that we are asking the private sector to join in with government. On the tax structure, it will have to depend. The tax fiscal policy always depends on the industrialization policy, the investment policy of any country. I was a little bit surprised to hear in the SONA that our manufacturing sector was vibrant. I am still, to this point, trying to find where that vibrant manufacturing sector exists. So, but that is something that I believe we should be attending to. We don't make anything anymore. And the most successful economy in the last 10, 15 years has been an economy based on making things. China, they make everything. And that is what we should try to learn those lessons.
My main question is mainly about DOT, and I second the guy about talking about EDSA. We have EDSA in the air and also on maritime. What are you going to do? You are in charge of the administration at this point.
Sorry, but what's your question?
The question is about the aviation side. We have so much investment. and also on the maritime side. So we're not restricting our ecology as far as transportation towards our inner island. If you are in a position, are we going to change develop infrastructure of our aviation commercial traffic?
It comes back again to infrastructure, to public investment. Just to take up your subject on aviation. If you remember, a few years back, the goal was to reach 10 million tourists a year. Actually, it may sound like a large number, but it is small compared to other countries. But that was the goal. Many observers have noticed that we are stuck at 4.5 million and have been stuck at that simply because we do not have the capacity to bring more people in. We do not have the infrastructure, we do not the software even for the tourism industry. The shortage in capacity does not only affect the tourism industry, but all kinds of commerce. The amount of money that was lost because of the port congestion, because of the having to transport what was supposed to go into Manila, the people in Demoraje daw is more expensive than the actual cost of all the materials that they were bringing in. To the point that the ships would simply, after waiting a week, turn around and drop them off in Hong Kong. I was talking to one of the operators and I was saying, why don't you increase the flights to this place, to that place? And they said the department of the DOTC has told them, Cebu Pac is allowed 200 flights a day. That's it. If you're going to add flights to one place, you have to remove flights from another place. So we have reached that plateau. And if we are going to increase capacity, we have to build better infrastructure. The development is not going quickly enough for us to take full advantage of what should be a country that is in the middle of the so-called emerging markets. And the rest of the world is looking to us for our vibrance and our progress. We're not playing as big a part in that as we could be, if only we would recognize the importance of public investment. And it is a little bit, again, confusing when we hear our economic managers boasting about the retained earnings of the government. If you have large retained earnings in the government, you are not doing your job. It is the job of government not to have a big bank balance, but to provide a service. Of the appropriated funds for last year's budget, 400 billion pesos remains unspent. Now, how can you possibly have a good delivery of services to the people if 400 billion pesos of your appropriated funds in your budget remains unspent? It is not a point of pride, it should be a point of failure and be recognized as such. I think it's the policymakers that really have to readjust their way of thinking. One of the problems that the PPP was one of the reasons it's become a fundraising exercise. Yung palakihan ng subsidy. The PPPs are not there to provide income for the government. The PPPs are there to provide a service to the people. This is a very strange approach to the PPP, and it's something that we are going to remove from the process in the rewriting of the PPP law.
Assuming that you run and elected, you mentioned about decreasing the income tax rate for businesses, but what about for individuals? Would you support a bill or will you certify a version of revisiting or lowering the income tax rates for individuals in the income tax bracket? As you might be aware, among the ASEAN neighbors, we're the highest, if not one of the highest. I think insofar as the highest income tax bracket that we have, 500,000 tax at 32, as opposed to our neighbor in Thailand, their 30% is 5 million pesos, in Singapore is at 20%. And if you would support that, what would be your countermeasure to be able to make up for the foregone revenue?
It is something actually that we're starting to do now. What has happened is because the categories were written into the tax code a long time ago. And many people who you would not consider to be in the middle class have now found themselves in that. And those people who you would not have considered to be in A or B have found themselves in that sector. We simply have to redefine those categories because those categories are no longer, the way that the tax code is written and the way that the categories have been defined is no longer relevant. What has happened is that we have left the process of redefining very late. And that's why we have found ourselves in this position where those who actually should not be taxed in such a high tax category find themselves in the tax category, when in fact, when you look at the total income distribution, they are maybe at the lower end, but they are paying taxes that are more appropriate for those who are closer to the higher end of the category. It is something that we have recognized and we are trying to fix, but putting those absolute numbers and picking them so that they are relevant for as long as possible has turned out to be more complicated than we had thought. But again, there are many lessons that we can learn from our neighbors and from our competitors.
You mentioned a while ago that subsidy is not something good for the country, and for all we know, most of the ASEAN partners are in a very big subsidy in terms of their energy delivery. With the bill now in place and being implemented, do you see any other improvement or any other option for us to bring down the rates of electricity, given the influx of technology, the renewable energies, and other sorts of relevant things related to the energy sector?
The sad thing is that the IPIRA law, with its attempt to make the power sector more efficient and to allow privatization to come in, what has been the actual effect in its implementation is the raising of the cost to the consumer of electricity. So I think we have to rethink that, and the regulation at the other end, in other words, after privatization, we improved. So many costs that really are not rightly passed on to the consumer are being passed onto the consumer. There have been additional costs for the consumer to pay for upcoming projects. Now, how is that? How can you possibly justify charging a consumer a higher cost for a project that has not yet even been started? The capital investment should not come from consumers; it must come from the corporation. So, this kind of unintended consequence are some of the things that we really need to address. The question of power generation, distribution, and transmission has been something that has bedeviled the Philippine economy for a while, and that I think has been due to a lack of forward planning. We are reactive rather than proactive, but even in that sense we react very, very slowly. Hence the constant 8-hour plus brownouts in Mindanao, the 3 to 4 hours in Visayas, and the constant threat of the same brownouts here in Luzon. We have to increase our capacity, but to fix the capacity to generate. But we have to also fix the system at the distribution level. And when I mean distribution, I mean at the electrical cooperative level. Much of the costs that go into the cost of current are really there because of the relationship of the cooperatives with NAPOCOR. The very liberal provision of debt by the NAPOCOR, I guess because of their dealings over the last 20 years, the whole system has changed, and what has happened is that the NAPOCOR and the cooperative simply feel that they'll never have to pay any of these debts anyway. And so utang ng utang, passing on the costs to the consumer, and no increase, no betterment in the efficiency of the distribution. Actually, one of the proponents of the rural electrification is right here, Congresswoman Marcos. She was the one who headed with General Dumol the rural electrification program. The function of the cooperatives has changed so much. It has become again a political entity. They are not really that interested in efficiency. They are not interested in business. Rather than holding position and trying to make as much money as they can out of the cooperative, which is contrary, anathema, to the entire conception of the rural electrification program. The energy sector is a very complicated one, and it is something that we have to leave to experts.
What is your plan in the mining industry?
Let us look at the example of Australia. Australia is one of the few countries in the world, Australia and I think Indonesia, that never suffered from the global recession, from the global financial crisis, because of its mining industry. And that's the potential that we have. With China, of course, buying up everything, not only in terms of energy, but also in mineral commodities, mineral wealth. there is a very much a ready market there. However, the main concerns for mining is because of the horror stories that we have suffered. The regulation of the mining it basically comes down to that. The protection of the environment, the protection of the ecology, the fair share of profits at the local level. You know, as governor, I was astounded one day on my way to work to see that they were setting up a hole. They were building roads, they were cutting down trees. I said, "What's going on? I don't know anything about this, and who gave you permission to do this?" And it was a mining concern, and they were going to dig exploratory holes. It did not recognize the part that local government plays and the local community plays, and the importance of being a good neighbor. So all these kinds of things have really put us against mining, simply because we feel, certainly at the local level, that it has not been fair to the communities where those mining concerns are. Not only because of the share in profits, not only because of the lack of consultations with the local communities, but also because of the potential damage to the environment. I am not saying that it is with a wave of a hand that we will solve all those problems, but we must also recognize the great potential that mining has for us. Because of China's demand for all of these products, the prices for all of these mineral goods has been very good for many years now. And some of those mines which had been closed because they were deemed unprofitable, now, if you crunch the numbers, are profitable again. So there is a great deal of potential. So it's in a sense a high risk, high return operation. You can get it right and make a lot of money out of it, bring lots of improvements to the local communities and to the national economy. But at the same time, if you are not careful, you can cause a great deal of damage that will take many generations to correct. It is something that must be regulated very, very closely. But again, it is not something that it is an opportunity for the national economy that we cannot afford to pass up either.
Nowadays, Filipinos have a harder time to travel and with their passport, their visas. Is there something that you can do as a future president? Is one question to change that. Two is the usury laws in financing, and hard for people to borrow money where interest rates are higher than most countries.
That is a question on monetary policy. That is something that, again, we have to be more, I believe, more liberal. Being debt averse is a healthy intuition, is a healthy instinct. However, we cannot maximize what we have without leveraging it with other sources of funds. And so, but again, this has been the investment policy of the central bank. It is perhaps a reaction to play safe because of all the problems that we have seen, where we got to the point, at least not in the Philippines, but in other highly evolved and complicated economic systems, where we got to the point where risk no longer had any cost. That's why we ended up with the subprime problem. That's why we ended up with this whole situation where the buying and selling of debt ended up putting us in a place where we simply did not understand what the system was doing any longer. That's why the great fall of the huge investment banks was not anticipated by anyone. And up to this day, we have not yet seen the explanation as to why it happened. Maybe it's parts of it, but not, I think, for the entire global. It has become so complex. But again, that is, I think, why the monetary policy of the central bank has been such. What was the first question again?
The visas, the ability to be able to travel easier.
Actually, when I first started traveling, when I first started going to school abroad, the countries in which Filipinos work had a very liberal policy towards us going in and out, for workers especially to come in and out. The problem was the tendency for us to overstay and to become undocumented workers in their economy. As a matter of fact, in Europe, there used to be in most of the EU, no need for a visa for a Filipino if you are going to stay less than a month. On the other hand, I know many Filipinos who would stay for 28 days, just leave the country and come back and start their month again. And this kind of abuse led actually the Philippine government is the one that asked that there be a more stringent policy towards immigration, towards emigration, towards foreign workers coming in. The root of the problem is that there are no jobs in the Philippines. Kaya tayo may TNT. In places like Italy, for example, the number of undocumented Filipinos is equal to the number of the documented workers. So in any European country, you say, ilan undocumented dyan? 60,000 Filipinos. That's 120,000 Filipinos, in fact. That is why we have had to request other countries to be more strict, because it is to the detriment of those workers who are working legally. You know, I'm a Filipino. I quite understand why they do it. There are no jobs here. The ultimate answer, again, is to create jobs. How do you do that? You make the economy grow. How do you make the economy grow? You make public investments in the economy. And that's the only way. And you make your systems more efficient. You make government interfere as little as possible, but as much as is necessary in all business activities. It is a general concept. Again, the application to practical problems is not necessarily obvious, but it is still something we need to look for.
Please give him a big round of applause.
Thank you very much.